Today, we're going to talk about a huge shift in how we think about the human mind. It's called neurodiversity, and it's completely reframing conditions like ADHD and autism, moving them away from the language of disorder and into the language of simple human difference.
So here's the big question that really kicks this whole thing off. Are we supposed to be curing people to fit into a certain kind of world? Or should we be redesigning our world to fit the incredible variety of people that are actually in it? That single question challenges decades of established medical thinking.
And look, this isn't some tiny niche topic we're talking about. The estimates right now suggest that somewhere between 15 and 20% of the entire global population is considered neurodivergent. That's a huge number. We're talking autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and more. This is a conversation about our coworkers, our friends, our family members, and yeah, very possibly about us. Now, how have we typically dealt with neurodivergence, especially something like ADHD? Well, for the most part, with medication. Just look at this chart. Between 2012 and 2023, stimulant prescriptions in the US absolutely skyrocketed. It's a massive increase that really makes you stop and ask if our whole approach is pointing in the right direction. And behind every single one of those data points, there's a real person. When the system that's built around that medication starts to crack, like during the recent shortages, the effect on people's lives is just huge. This quote from a Reddit user really captures that feeling of frustration, of just being defeated by a system where your ability to function depends on a supply chain you have no control over. So this raises a really critical question. If the problem isn't actually something broken inside the person, then where does all the difficulty and struggle come from? Well, there's a theory that says the answer has nothing to do with what's wrong with the individual and everything to do with their environment. And that brings us to something called the neurocognitive mismatch theory. The core idea is actually pretty simple, but it's totally revolutionary. It says that what we call dysfunction isn't a bug in a person's brain. Not at all. It's a clash, a mismatch between someone's natural, hardwired traits and an environment that just wasn't built for them. So what does that mismatch actually look like in the real world? Well, here's a perfect example. Imagine you're this student. You're perfectly capable of learning, but you're dropped into a digital system that's basically hostile to the way your brain processes information. The problem isn't the student, it's the design of the system, and that leads straight to burnout. So, what do people do to survive in these mismatched environments? Well, very often, they learn to do something called masking. Think of it as this constant, exhausting performance of hiding your true, authentic self. You're suppressing natural behaviors, you're forcing eye contact, you're scripting conversations in your head, all just to try and fit in and meet neurotypical expectations. And the cost of that performance is just immense. The energy it takes to keep that mask on all day at work or school, it doesn't just vanish when you get home. It leads to this deep, profound exhaustion, social withdrawal, and burnout that can really impact every part of a person's life. Okay, so this is where everything starts to shift. This is where the neurodiversity revolution comes in, because it offers a completely different way of looking at these experiences. It challenges the very foundation of how we've defined disability for a long, long time. And it really comes down to these two opposite ways of thinking. For decades, we've had the medical model, which says the problem is inside you. It's a deficit, and it needs to be fixed. But the social model, which is the heart of the neurodiversity movement, flips that script completely. It says the disability isn't in the person, it's created by society, by things like inflexible systems and social prejudice. And think about how the language we use, which is so shaped by that medical model, can turn totally normal behaviors into pathologies. A neurotypical person has a deep interest in something, we call it a hobby. A neurodivergent person does the same thing. Suddenly, it's a fixation or perseveration. See how that works? It's the exact same behavior, but the label turns one into a problem. So, at its core, the neurodiversity movement is really built on this one simple but incredibly powerful idea. Neurological differences aren't mistakes. They're not errors. They are a natural, normal, and valuable part of human genetic diversity, just like having different eye colors or being left-handed. And this is where it gets really fascinating, because if we accept that these are just differences, not deficits, it opens up a whole new way of looking at things. What if these neurological variations actually come with their own unique set of strengths, maybe even some superpowers? In fact, research is starting to map this out. We're seeing direct correlations between autism, for example, and a whole range of cognitive strengths, things like intense focus, an incredible eye for detail, and heightened sensory abilities. This isn't about ignoring the challenges, not at all. It's about recognizing that the same brain wiring can produce some pretty remarkable talents. Let's just run through some of these common strengths. We're talking about meticulous attention to detail, the ability to gain incredibly deep knowledge on a topic, that capacity to hyper-focus for hours, innovative problem solving, seeing patterns that nobody else does. In the right environment, these aren't symptoms to be managed, these are assets. And this brings us right back to that idea of environment, especially when we talk about ADHD. There's this fantastic theory called the hunter in a farmer's world. It suggests that traits we now pathologize, like constantly scanning your environment, being impulsive, having high energy, were actually huge advantages for survival in a hunter-gatherer society. But in the highly structured, predictable farmer's world of a modern office or classroom, those same traits suddenly get labeled a disorder. And hey, this isn't just a cool theory, it's been put to the test. In one amazing study, researchers had different groups build towers out of spaghetti. You had groups of only autistic people, groups of only non-autistic people, and then you had mixed neurodiverse groups. And guess what? The homogeneous groups built pretty similar towers. But the neurodiverse pairs, their towers were by far the most innovative. It's a crystal clear demonstration that cognitive diversity can be a powerful engine for creativity. So, this all leads to the final, most important piece of the puzzle. If the environment is the key, then we need to redesign our environments. The big question becomes, how do we build a world that doesn't just tolerate neurodivergence, but actually unleashes its power? In education, one of the best roadmaps we have is something called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. The idea is to stop designing for some imaginary average student and then making exceptions. Instead, you design flexible learning environments from the very beginning, with multiple ways for students to engage with the material, to understand it, and to show what they know. You're designing for everyone right from the start. And these same principles apply directly to the workplace. It means we have to rethink everything, from how we recruit people, moving past traditional interviews that can be huge barriers, to how we design our office spaces, with things like quiet zones for sensory needs. It means being super clear in our communication. And maybe most important of all, it means building a culture of psychological safety, where people feel they can finally bring their whole, authentic selves to work without having to wear that exhausting mask. I want to end on this really powerful thought because it just ties everything together so well. The reason these ways of thinking still exist isn't because evolution made a mistake. It's because the success of humanity has always relied on having a diversity of minds. The detail-oriented person, the out-of-the-box thinker, the pattern spotter, these weren't bugs. They were features that were essential for our collective survival. So that leaves all of us with a final question. Now that we're starting to understand neurodiversity not as a deficit, but as a vital part of our collective human strength, what do we do about it? How can we, in our own lives, start to redesign our schools, our workplaces, and our communities to finally unlock all of this incredible potential that's been there the whole time?